And recently, President Trump, in the wake of the sexual harassment scandals engulfing figures from both the left and the right, has decided to change his position on the Access Hollywood tape that was unearthed during the campaign. Now, that's weird. So, wait a minute. How can you change your position on the Access Hollywood tape that you did? Well, by basically claiming, you know what? I went back and I gave it a second look, and it turns out it wasn't me. I didn't actually say those things. Really? Oh, that's interesting. Now, look, you guys saw the tape for yourselves. Bush himself was fired from NBC over it. And when it came out last year, President Trump had admitted that, yeah, it was real, but you know what? It was just locker room talk. Ah, right. Of course, we know that Trump is also a pathological liar and says, that, hey, you know, on second thought, it's not actually me. I wasn't talking about grabbing pussy, not my voice. You know what? It's just nothing but fake news. Now, Billy Bush, the guy who was there, the guy who was in the tape, said, no, I actually remember I was there. It was you. Hilarious. Now, Billy Bush went to the New York Times and wrote an op-ed about this. And he said, quote, he said it, grab him by the pussy. Of course he said it. And we laughed along, without a single doubt that this was hypothetical hot air from America's highest rated bloviator. Along with Donald Trump and me, there were 7 other guys present on the bus at that time, and every single one of us assumed we were listening to a crass stand-up act. He was performing, surely. None of this was real. No, we now know better. Okay, so, look. Now, if you're listening to something like that, talking about, oh, I like to grab women by the genitals, and, you know, I make sure to carry Tic Tacs because I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. Does that sound like something that you would joke about? Like a normal person? Does that sound something like a normal person would joke about? Well, I guess it depends on your context, but when it comes to me and what I perceive as normal, this is not normal. This is not what normal people joke about, okay? And I guess if you're hanging around people who do joke about grabbing people out by the pussy, well, then maybe you should reconsider who you're hanging out with. I'm just saying. Now, anybody who's done any research on President Trump during the campaign, in which, again, we did during the election, during the campaign, during the primary, we know that President Trump's had a long history of sexual assault. Now, this Access Hollywood tape was filmed way, way before the election. So, look, I could understand if somebody who's covering Trump, who's talking with Trump, didn't necessarily know about the long history of accusations. That said, usually if you're in the news business, it would make sense if you did know. But I guess I'm going to excuse him about that, okay? Now, for me, again, you don't joke about grabbing somebody by the genitals without permission. So the fact that these guys were all sitting there laughing about this, well, that still makes them not great people in my opinion. But assuming he really believed it was a joke, soon after he got punished for it and then had stopped laughing. Now he writes, recently I sat down and read an article dating from October of 2016. It was published days after my departure from NBC, a time when I wasn't processing anything productively. In it, the author reviewed the various first-hand accounts of Mr. Trump that at that point had come from 20 women. Some of what Natasha Stoynoff, Rachel Crooks, Jessica Leeds and Jill Harth alleged involved forceful kissing. Ms. Harth said he pushed her up against a wall with his hands all over her, trying to kiss her. Her story makes the whole better use some Tic Tacs and just start kissing them routine real. I believe her. Kristen Anderson said that Mr. Trump reached under her skirt and touched her vagina through her underwear while they were at a New York nightclub in the 1990s. That makes the grab 'em by the pussy routine real. I believe her. Well, that's because it wasn't a routine. This wasn't a joke. This was a brag. All Trump does is brag about things that he's done and things that he has. This is not somebody who just jokes about these things. And you probably should have picked up on it sooner. If you had done any research and if you had done anything and if you knew at all about who Trump was as a person, you would know this. You would know that, oh my God, he's talking about grabbing women by the genitals. Again, even if you're around somebody who's joking about that, it's not funny. It's never funny. That is a red flag. Normal people do not joke about that. Do you know who jokes about that? Predators. You know who laughs at that? Terrible people. Now Bush goes on to explain himself further. Quote, in 2005, I was in my first full year as a co-anchor of the show Access Hollywood. Mr. Trump, then on The Apprentice, was the network's biggest star. The key to succeeding in my line of work was establishing a strong rapport with celebrities. I did that and was rewarded for it. My segments with Donald Trump, when I was just a correspondent, were part of the reason I got promoted. NBC had tripled my salary and paid for my moving van from New York to LA. Was I acting out of self-interest? You bet I was. Was I alone? Far from it. With Mr. Trump's outsized viewership back in 2005, everybody from Billy Bush on up to the top brass at the 52nd floor had to stroke the ego of the big cash cow along the way to higher earnings. None of us were guilty of knowingly enabling our future president, but all of us were guilty of sacrificing a bit of ourselves in the name of success. Now, I think right there is a little bit of self-realization. And it's also damning. When you look at the industry and you look at what people will do and the people that will hang out with, all for money and access. This is what gets you paid better. This is what advances you in the industry. It's gross and definitely needs massive, massive reform, right? And it also explains how this culture of sexual assault and sexual harassment goes unpunished. They don't look at people like Harvey Weinstein because they're powerful. They didn't look at people like President Trump, who was, then just a highly paid reality star. They didn't look at any of that because, hey man, this guy is our cash cow. So this is a big problem. And it happens not just in Hollywood, but it also happens in basically anywhere where there's people in positions of power. No side is immune to this phenomenon, right? And yet we elected a president. Well, I can't say we, but there are right-wingers out there, a sizable majority of people, that actually voted for this person to become president. Now, Billy Bush is going to continue about the women who were victims of of President Trump. He said, to these women, I will never know the fear you felt or the frustration of being summarily dismissed and called a liar. But I do know a lot about the anguish of being inexorably linked to Donald Trump. You have my respect and admiration. You are culture warriors at the forefront of necessary change. Now, this is interesting because he says, oh man, I'll never know the fear you felt or the frustration of being called a liar. And there's a lot of things that we dudes who are not victims of sexual assault and harassment will never know. And that needs to be talked about. His anguish of being linked to President Trump is nowhere near in comparison to how people who are victims of this sexual assault, rape, and harassment feel. But I do get his point where he's trying to empathize, right? And he continues, I have faith that when the hard work of exposing these injustices is over, and really we've only just begun, the current media drama of who did what to whom will give way to a constructive dialogue between mature men and women in the workplace and beyond. The activist and gender relations expert Jackson Katz has said that this is not a women's issue, it's a men's issue. That's a great place to start, and something I have real thoughts about, but it is a story for another day. Today is about reckoning and reawakening, and I hope it reaches all the guys in the bus. Well, look, man, I am less worried about the dudes on the bus than I am about the commander-in-chief, who is a pathological liar and a sexual harasser. Now, in light of that, I'm a little bit more forgiving of Billy Bush, right? And his motivations, which I'm sure are certainly not altruistic. Yes, there is self-involvement here. There was, he's of course wanting to get back into TV. Do you really blame him? Especially because, look, he got screwed over. I mean, think about it. The tape comes out, he gets fired, and what happens to the guy who actually said these things? He goes on to be president. If that happened to me, I would be super pissed. And I would definitely want to get back into TV, because that would seem to be incredibly unfair. Now, that said, we have a worse problem than just Trump, too. We have a problem in which people of political parties, both political parties, are excusing the actions of people in those parties, you know, things like sexual assault, simply because of their political views. Now, the right does it, even the left does it. And look at Al Franken, look at Bill Clinton, John Conyers. All those people have their apologists, right? And although it's not quite as prevalent on the left, or as like I would like to believe that it's not quite as prevalent, on the right, it seems to be a much bigger problem. I mean, in Alabama, it's looking like they're going to elect a child molester. So while it's not equal, in my opinion, the left does do it to a degree, and I think it's important to point that out, and to point out those actors. But look, motivations aside, as I said, Bush got punished, learned his lesson, I believe, and I think he got some humility from the entire situation. President Trump will never know humility because he either gets rewarded for it, or he shifts the blame and then lies. He lies without any sort of remorse. He is the worst kind of person. And look, there's nobody in this story that's a great guy. But at least Billy Bush seems to be showing some sort of desire to own up for his mistakes, even if it is enlightened self-interest. And at this point, that's sort of the least that we can ask for. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.